Hey everybody, it's Kat, and I want to welcome you to this episode of Backstory Sessions. I'm joined today by my co-host, Willie. Hey Willie.
Hey, Kat.
Well, this month in March Madness, you know how it goes.
Oh, yeah.
Um, we're going to be talking about some moments today that force us to kind of rewrite our lives. Whether that's creatively, emotionally, personally. That's definitely a March Madness kind of topic, don't you think?
Yes, I do.
Well, we have a guest today who is an author and screenwriter, Paul Locander, whose novel Power and Way. It grew up an award-winning screenplay, and then it's about this deeper complicated relationship with his dad. And I feel like at the heart of the story, it's how the relationships that we have with our dads shape who we become as adults. So, that's a heavy topic.
Oh, yeah, it sure is.
Um, And so today we're going to talk with Paul about that journey and hear his backstory. So Paul, I want to welcome you. We're really excited to hear your story and to have you as our guest.
Well, thank you for having me on the show, Kat. I really appreciate it.
All right, well, let's go back to the kind of the roots and the early influence of your life. When you think about your childhood, what is the first memory that comes to mind involving your dad?
All right, let me find the couch here because I feel like I'm going to be in a psychology session, um, or a
Yes,
psychiatry session.
our
Uh,
hourly rates are posted.
wow. So a lot of the early memories I had with my dad, I'm actually a Chicago kid, and um, I think the first core memories I had really stemmed from arguments that my mom and my dad would have. And both my sister and I would be witness to. And at the time, I really didn't understand what was happening, except mom and dad were yelling at each other. And um, it really, it really struck me when I was about, I think maybe 7 or 8, there was a huge argument about something I wanted to do. And the root of it was simply I didn't have any shoes, appropriate shoes to wear. My mom was like, well, so what? And my father just flipped out. And that kind of set the stage of myself not wanting to be the source of any sort of friction or any sort of arguments. And that's something that's really kind of haunted me over the years. Kind of fast forward from there, uh, I had moved out to the San Francisco Bay Area, followed my dad after he had left my mom. And it was then I really started to recognize a disconnect that I had with him. It was more of a, first he was somewhat emotionally aloof. But then as I got older, especially when you go into those treacherous teenage years, there was an intellectual gap. And I really started to uh, sense a degree of disappointment from him because I was starting to not hit specific milestones that he may have laid out for me that I never knew. Um, to to my dad's credit, he was highly educated, but not a college kind of guy. He read a number of books. He spent a lot of time reading these very thick novels, and I had no interest in reading Homer's The Odyssey, but he was all over it. And that sort of that chasm kind of grew from there. Um, and then just over the years, I started to really just kind of build this sort of defensive wall around around myself when it came to my father. Because anytime I talked with him, it was always with a taste of disdain or disappointment or look, kid, I just don't want to deal with you. And that lasted until really the day he died in 1988. And it was something I never really resolved with him. And unfortunately, it took me to write the novel many, many years later to really work out what was going on between my dad and I.
So, did your sister have similar feelings about your dad?
She did not. Interestingly enough, and this is kind of outlined in the book, is my dad was raised entirely by women. His dad, my dad was a product of the Depression. He was born in 1930 and probably right around the mid 30s. His father just took off. A lot of husbands and fathers did that during the times of the Depression because they just couldn't support their families, so they just split. So his father left, and he was just left to be raised by his mom, his aunt. He had sisters at that time, and there was no father figure around. There was no baseline for him to work with. So my sister, both my sister and my half sister, they got along far better with my dad than myself and my half brother, because my dad was used to women. He just didn't know what to do with the son.
So when you look at him as a dad to them, do you feel like there was a distinct difference in the way he was present for them?
There was. It's hard for me to articulate, especially during a kind of a short session like this.
Right.
But he was far more involved in the things my sister did. He found my sister highly entertaining. He loved the fact that she was in theater and that she could over dramatize anything she was in, and he just absolutely loved that. Another complicating factor is that my dad was a heavy drinker. He was, in my book, he was an alcoholic. Um, so it's just, there was just a lot of things that were just not working between me and him. But again, with my sister, he found a sort of a natural connect with.
Where did your mom fit in kind of to it all? Like, is she caught in the middle, or does she defend you, or
Whoa, you're digging in deep here, and I'm going to give you a whopper of an answer. My mom had absolutely horrible taste in men, and she married my father after she left. Now, after he left his first wife, my mom was a little bit of the homewrecker. So my dad left his first wife for my mom, and living with my father was not easy for a spouse. And my mom, who was already dealing with father issues on her own, worked as a candy striper. For those who've been around long enough, a candy striper is somebody who would help out at the hospitals. I think I can't remember what the name of them now are, but they're not called candy stripers, but they had access to just about any meds they wanted. And she developed a drug habit. And
Oh,
by 1969, my father had enough of my mom and her drug habit, and he left. So my mom was pretty much not in the middle. She was pretty much where she was, wherever that was. So my sister and I kind of grew up a little bit on our own, but certainly with a mom who wasn't necessarily there in the way she should have been. But also, we're talking in my mind now about ancient history. My mom died in 1973, so it's a conversation I never really got to have with her.
yeah. Well, it seems like, there's a really deep backstory that is leading to you eventually writing the book, the screenplay, and we're going to talk about that. So, um, you move out and you're going about your life finally. Um, do you find the effects from these relationships that you had with your dad, with your mom, they're still present with you as you're like how did they influence you, I guess, or continue to influence you once you uh, have moved and are free, at least physically, from being there?
I am putting together an answer here that is going to be articulate. Um, my father did a great job of instilling me a level of insecurity and a lack of confidence. During the time I grew up with him, he had done an amazing job of, and it may have been completely inadvertent on his part, but he did a great job of making me feel consistently inadequate. So I would always question my value, question my worth. So his level of disappointment with me was very, very defining, and it forced me a lot to go inside of a shell because I would take for verbatim that I was some sort of failure. And it took a long, long time to get over that. I was in a complicated relationship early on in my early 20s that really exacerbated that whole feeling. And it wasn't until I met my wife in 1990 where she really kind of saw that lack of confidence that my dad had really kind of hammered into me. And it took her a very, very long time to kind of erode that feeling away, but it still affects me today. I could get into a discussion with a senior executive at a company, and I can just feel that sort of that judgment coming from my father uh, in talking with some of these people because they would talk in the same way he did.
Hmm.
And it wasn't until I finally wrote the novel and even take the screenplay, it took me a novel to work it out that it really wasn't anything I did wrong. And it wasn't really anything I guess he did wrong. We were just two different people who just simply didn't get along. And not everybody's compatible, and not everybody can talk with everybody else. There's people that I can just casually chat with, like you and like Willie. And there's others who you talk to them and you get no feedback. It's like talking to a wall that just absorbs all sound. And I'm the type of person that needs some general level of feedback to know that okay, I'm connecting with this person, or this person's hearing me, or this person and I can work out some sort of mutual level of communication.
Well, when you meet your to be wife, um it- does that communication, like, is she a person that you finally feel like I found someone that gets me, and or were there still like communication barriers of not letting someone in?
No, not at all. Not with my wife. She's simply an angel that apparently got punted out of heaven to take care of me. Uh,
Aw.
she's just she she figured me out pretty quickly. And she doesn't, and we're highly compatible and we're best friends, and uh, we don't really want to go anywhere without each other. She can actually tell, if I've got an odd energy about me, she can pick up on it. She's really amazing. So, and she's somebody that I immediately connected with. Um, a little funny anecdote is the story of the night we actually did meet. We chatted for a while, and it was going so well. I said, okay, I have to go now because I didn't want her to spend any more time with me, so I would have a chance to blow it. Um,
Yeah,
but we got together a couple days later for our first date, and we've been kind of together ever since. And she knows me very well. She can read me very well. She's my biggest cheerleader, and it's just amazing.
awesome. All right, Willie, before we jump into power and way, um, what questions do you have?
Well, I too can relate, to being raised by women like your father because my mom and dad got a divorce when before I was 3 years old. So, I saw my father, on occasion, but it was like awkward.
Yeah.
But my question is, do you think that fathers and sons have a harder time getting along than mothers and daughters?
I honestly don't know the answer to that question. The one of the editors on the book uh, commented that this is not just a father and son story. This can be a mother and daughter story, or a mother and son, or a father and daughter story. I don't it. I used to think it was just a father and son issue, mostly with me,
Okay.
and I learned that that was certainly not the case. I had one actor who read the script and identified with it immediately, and wanted to do the lead in the film. And I've heard from my editor, one of my editors again, is that, I this is something I've had experience myself, and so I'm getting some feedback from others that this is really, hits home, and I think it's gender neutral.
Okay.
Well, I certainly, was very close with my father, and it seemed my brother and mom were very close. So, I guess in some ways, um, I see it in the way that maybe you first did of the complications, being a certain way when actually, depending on, I think, it could be that me and my mom were the ones that got along, and there's so many variables I think that makes this relationship work or not work, and
Yeah.
or I guess be difficult, or be easy. Um,
My wife was very, very close with her mom. They were basically almost the same person. Um, and she recently, my mother-in-law recently passed away, which was very sad. But she had a great relationship with her mother and a good relationship with her father. So she lived a different Brady Bunch style life than I did. But after my wife had read the script and had read the novel and actually had met my half brother, she started to see a lot of that disconnect and a lot of that, um, that sort of that emotional chasm. So again, I think it really has to do with people just being different. I mean, I wish I could, pin it on something like I peed on his tie or I barfed in his soup or something like that. I did something terrible to my dad, but it's just not one thing. It's just, I think it was the way he was brought up and the way I read it. And if I was to ask my dad today, he would say, "What are you talking about? There's nothing wrong." So,
well, I was
Mm.
going to ask you if you felt like, the absence of his dad early on,
Yeah.
maybe influenced his ability to at least have that role model, of how a dad should be, I guess.
he never had it. When his father actually reached out to him, I think it was sometime in the late 50s. My dad never wanted to talk to him. He simply just hung up on him. And my grandfather committed suicide not long after that.
Mm.
Um, and then my father had a little bit of a kind of a conga line of dads that came through the house as my grandmother, you know, hooked up and got married with other gentlemen, and those did not go well. So my dad just does no baseline for a father. He had nothing to work with. And again, I think it's also my interests were different than his. He was at a different point in his life and didn't have much of an interest in a son whose interests were remarkably different. Uh, be honest with you, if my dad knew I had written a book, he would probably be rolling around in his grave.
Because
Huh.
you didn't like to read and
Pretty much.
yeah.
Yeah, because I didn't read Moby Dick and The Odyssey and oh my God, what are some of the other crazy long-haired books he had? Like all of Upton Sinclair's books and you know the thick stuff and books on Mozart. And I just
Oh,
when you're a
goodness.
teenager in the 70s, that was not in not in his interest. You know, he loved listening to harpsichord and Debussy. I was getting into Aerosmith in Boston. We were
Yay.
going entirely different directions.
Um, well, so what led you to start writing since were not driven really to be a reader of classics?
So when I was about 11 or 12, I started to have uh, this thing that started happening around in my head. Doctor. I kept having these cinematic scenes going around in my head. Am I insane? Um, but I had an early love for film. Uh, and I just certainly did not have a great start because I watched some horrendous stuff on TV in my in my youth. But when 2001 Space Odyssey came out, I actually had no idea what that movie was about, but I saw it 9 times.
Wow.
And I started seeing some other films like Failsafe and some other really strong films that were made at the time. And that really started to kind of trigger these cinematic scenes that would just keep repeating in my head. And I carry that throughout mm, the latter years of being a, preteen, all the way through being a teenager, and all the way through to into my 20s. And I just could not figure out what to do with these scenes. And these scenes would be just conversations or it would be some sort of cinematic shot. Uh, it didn't really come to me until I was shortly after I was married that maybe I can do something with these scenes. And I took my first shot at writing a screenplay, mostly because I needed an outlet to get the stuff out of my head. And I had taken all of those scenes, well, most of them, and strung them into my first script. And I had no idea what I was doing. I read a couple of formatting screenplay books, and it wasn't until I actually opened up a script and actually read it. I don't think it was A Few Good Men. I think it was another script that I cracked open, and it was a format. No, it was a Star Trek Next Generation script that I read. And I just opened it up and I looked at the script and I immediately understood the format. I immediately understood how the story structure was. And that is how I really came to get the scenes into script format and these scenes left my head. So it was sort of taking that repetitive weight in my head and laying it out on paper. And, I was now free of that weight. So I wrote that first script, And then I think, wow, I got a really great way of getting a lot of these ideas and future ideas into a format that is generally pretty quick to create. So I really took to screenwriting early on.
How did it feel to find an outlet?
Relief. It was sort of like, thank God I got
Yeah.
it out. And when you send it out to agents or to others to read and you get some positive feedback, that's when you start thinking, okay, maybe I'm not really all that crazy. Maybe it's the universe trying to tell me something. But it was a relief to get that stuff out of my head.
So, what was the first thing that you wrote and sent out, and what was the feedback?
So the first script I wrote is a political thriller called Rights of Succession. And I wrote that in 90, I think. And the I basically got my first agent off of that script. And the feedback was really, really good and it was enough to encourage me to write the next script, which was a movie
The movie.
called. Can you guys still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Um, So as I started getting more feedback from the more of the scripts I wrote, that sort of just started a prolific machine that I, just continue to create stories. What's cool about the first script, Rights of Succession, is a character in that script was so well defined and such a part of me that I carried her into Power and Way. So she is a character that actually originated from my first script that is in the book and the
What?
Power Away script.
So, what was it about that character, that made her so, I guess, well developed um, that you
She
decided to
was
keep her?
she was so easy to write for. Uh, she's a bit of a personification of myself, uh, but I gave her such life as a character. Uh, she was so well defined in my head that she wrote her own lines. And I just somehow I knew how this character would feel, how she would react, and how strong she was. Um, and I love strong female characters. Uh, to me, some of the most amazing characters are those that are female. For example, obviously Sigourney Weaver's Ripley is, you got a strong character there. But also when you get to characters like Jodie Foster's Clarice in Silence of the Lambs, those characters are so fascinating to me. And they they've become a force that men in stories have to contend with, have to work with, and have to match. And those dynamics, those interactions are really fascinating to me. So I'm always a fan of strong women characters. Um, and so she was so strong that she had a perfect place in Power and Way.
Well, that is fascinating, and I'm glad to hear, that you have that perspective because we certainly always can use more strong women characters. Um, okay, Willie. So this is pretty exciting. Now we're into his mind and, what is inspiring these stories.
Be careful, it's a scary place up here.
uh, so has has writing this book sort of helped you to let let yourself sort of uh, off the hook uh, with not getting along with your dad? Has it sort of gave you a release of some sort?
Oh, certainly, definitely. In the book, much more in the book than in the script, but in the novel, I really put myself and my father on trial. And the novel forced me to see things or dev not necessarily see things. That's not quite right, but it's more, it forced me to develop a narrative of what and who and how my father came to be. Um, Early on, my father was a puzzle and I can never figure out. But everybody has feelings, everybody has dreams, everybody has hopes, everybody has fears. And I just never knew any of those of my father. So when I wrote the novel, I had to create that narrative. It forced me to start seeing things from his point of view. You know, why was he raised by women? Why did he not get along with his son? Why was he angry at the world? What was his fears? What was his dreams? Um, so again, that sort of put myself and him on not necessarily like a criminal trial, but it was a trial in the sense of pe all the people in the novel and also around me could actually see why my father behaved the way he did and why I responded the way I did to him. And in the end, it was a great relief to reach that conclusion that we were just two different people. And it was not something that it was unique to me. It wasn't necessarily a problem with me. And I think that's one of the big draws of the book is that it communicates to those descendants of their parents that if they don't get along with them, it's not their fault. Everybody's an individual, everybody's different.
Was it hard not to make one person the villain, like the complete villain? Because often if you're putting yourself into a character, which you said the female character was a lot of the traits of you, um, how did you go about keeping the balance of that same perspective for your dad's character?
So in the script, my father's role in the script, he's more of an antagonist.
Okay.
In the novel, I found out really early on that if I was going to keep him as an antagonist, he was going to wind up being very one-dimensional. There would be nothing redeemable about his character. Um, and he's not, as an antagonist, and it's not necessarily a foil, but I had to work on my father's personality and I had to give him something redeemable so the reader could understand and 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 have some sort of empathy for his character as to why he became the way he was. Um, there's a lot of material out there, both in film and novels, where antagonists are very one-dimensional or maybe two-dimensional. But for me, the more one digs into an antagonist and what makes them who they are, makes for a much more fascinating story. I mean, you could have like a Hannibal Lecter, um, who tends to be a little bit more one-dimensional. He's intelligent, he's well-read, and he's, this and that. But in the end, he's still far more, at least to me, one-dimensional. But oddly enough, if you watch, say, Fallout, the new series Fallout, um, the character, the ghoul, who's first seen as an antagonist, but we spend time with this character, we learn how he became who he was, and maybe he's not such an antagonist after all, and he's got things he's working out. another great example of it, and it came from a very surprising place. I don't know if you guys ever seen Creed 2. It's the um, it's like the seventh Rocky movie,
Yeah.
but yeah. So in Creed 2, the the boxer who is Drago's son, he's seen as an antagonist. He is seen as a bruiser. He is seen as somebody who is, you know, just, mean and a bully and just brutal. But the movie spends time, the script spends time on him as to what made him who he was. And I found that absolutely fascinating. And that's to me a full story is if you can have some empathy to your antagonist, you've got a full story to work with.
So how long did it take you once you started writing? Was it quick? It came quickly to you?
Which part, the screenwriting or the novel writing?
Either or both.
Uh, so the script writing early on, that came pretty quickly to me. I cranked out a script about every quarter. Um, I slowed down as I got a little bit older and I started to run into some resistance where I was not able to move my scripts into production. I've had a handful of scripts get optioned. Power and Way is probably the one that's seen the most activity, and that's been the most recognized. And I've been trying to get that in front of a camera for far longer than I want to admit. So I've kind of slowed down a bit on the screenwriting, but I knew there was more to Power and Away than was just in the script. And because it was such a well-received script and so many people loved the story, I found that to be a really strong candidate to write as my first novel. And that one took a little bit of time. I was kind of blessed with the skeleton of the story already because I could just take the script and drop it into the novel. And that took very little time, but what took more effort was really inflating the story to more than it was. And that took probably a couple years.
Did you find that you liked novel writing more than screenwriting, or
Oh, oh, that's a question I can get in trouble with. Um, so screenwriting is great because you can tell story in shorthand. Uh, and just very, very strict in structure. So unless you're writing a limited series, you really need to write your story out in 120 pages. And everything you write has got to keep moving the story forward. Every piece of dialogue's got to move the story forward, unless you're Quentin Tarantino. Uh, and you've got to just everything's got to be forward motion in the script. So you are taught early on about word economy and plot economy and making things fit into a three-act structure so you can be done within 120 pages or so. In novel writing, you're afforded a lot more latitude and a lot more open space to tell your story. So I would say if I was in a hurry and I needed to get a story banged out there and I didn't want it to be a short story, I'd probably write it as a script. But if I wanted to take any of my existing scripts and inflate them into really elaborate or well-told stories, I would take that skeleton and put it into a novel. And that in itself was a lot of fun because then you're spending a lot more time with your characters, especially the ones you love. You're spending a lot more time on developing your prose and and just creating a world that you're the wizard of.
all right, Willie, this is your last question.
Your last chance, Willie.
Okay. Well, what I this is away from the book and dad, and I, what attracted you to aviation?
Oh, um, I took my first flight lesson in 1986, and it was more of I was driving down the highway and I was really looking for something to challenge myself, and I was looking for something to do. And I really didn't have a hobby at the time. I really didn't have anything kind of to do with myself. I was in between relationships at the time, and I was driving down the highway and I saw this Cessna 152 taking off from a local airport. And I said, I wonder if I can do that. And I took a Discovery flight, which was $19 back in the day, and it was something I could do. It was a good mental challenge. It keeps your brain active in different ways than writing does, and that's how I got into it. And I flew from then, got my license, I think, right around 1989, um, and then flew up to about 97. Uh, Took a 24-year hiatus and got back into flying just about 10 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah,
All
and
right. Interesting. You've
yeah,
got
I'm
a
a proud owner of a Cessna Cardinal, so it's a lot of fun.
well, so what is next for you?
So I have a couple books I'm working on. Next up is a book called Falling Ohio. It is based off one of my other well-received scripts that lives somewhat in the same universe as Power and Way. And then I have a science fiction novel that I had started to write a number of years ago that could be finished up relatively quickly. And then I have a sequel to Power and Way that carries that same character that I carried over from my first script into Power and Way, and her story continues. And I'm really looking forward to spending more time with that character because she's something else.
Someday you're gonna have to kill that character off. Is that gonna be hard for you?
Um, I will probably never kill that character off because I got taken to task by a director that was attached once to Power and Way, and there were some characters in the story, and they were creating problems. So I just killed the characters off, and he would just came to me. He says, "Paul, will you stop killing your characters?"
You're talking to the queen of killing characters off.
That's
Oh
right.
man.
Mine never survived, so
Oh, it was a bad habit I learned from watching Game of Thrones. When they killed off Sean Bean's character at the end of the first season, I was like, oh, that's kind of handy. And they did that in The Walking Dead too. So I was like, hey, if they can get away with it, so can I. So I've been told to knock it off. So I'm going to try to be a lot more mindful of my characters. But uh, for Andy, who's that character, she will live as long as I do and live beyond me in my books.
just can't kill her, huh?
I can't kill her. I just can't do it. Maybe in
Yeah.
a few books if she starts to annoy me. I don't know. Probably not. I'll probably kill everyone else.
Uh,
She'll be last woman standing.
well, there's something to be said for that. I feel like that's what I tell my characters before they get the axe.
Yeah.
You
Well,
made it
don't
you made it this far. That's pretty good.
yeah, don't worry. I mean, I have killed characters and I continue to do kill characters. There was one character I killed in Power and Way that took off maybe 15 or 20 pages. So it really saved a lot. So there's economy in that. There is a great economy in killing off characters, you have to admit.
Do you ever feel like the characters come to you like you're a channel for them rather than a creator of them?
Absolutely. All the time.
Yeah, I think
Uh, yeah, if you got a character that writes their own lines, you are golden. That's a fun character to write because you just have to keep up with them. If you run up with a character you're struggling with, then in my opinion, there's something wrong with that character because it's not coming natural.
Well, this has been a fascinating interview. Really great
Certainly has
backstory.
been.
Oh, I
Um,
appreciate it.
so for, the listeners out there who may have had a similar background with conflict or just lack of that solid relationship with a parent, what advice would you give them about healing and how it can look, how many ever years later in the future?
Some of it has to do with maturity, and not in the maturity of, oh, you're 14, you're not mature, but as you get some years behind you and you get more relationships under your belt, uh, once you get to that stage, you start seeing a lot of the algorithm that creates these disconnects that you have with people. When you're early on, it's very difficult to see that. But as an immediate step, I would say just really maybe look at the relationship and hold some value to yourself and then ask, maybe this isn't me. Why is this always, why is this disconnect my fault? And I think a lot of people will find that it's not really their fault. And that's something that I really hope the book presses upon people, that everything that has gone on in a family that they've been carrying around for years is not theirs to carry and it's not their fault.
So, where can people find the book for those that would like to read it?
They can find the book, Barnes& and Noble online, and it's also on Amazon. And for this week, which unfortunately it's going to be March when this is aired, but it's free on Kindle for this week. But it is also free on Kindle with Kindle Unlimited. And I'm pushing to get the book into a handful of bookstores, but right now it's mostly available online on Amazon and Barnes& and Noble.
Awesome. Well, I hope that you will come back and speak with us again, and when you have worked
Yes.
on, Andy and decided to kill her off.
I don't know. I might have a riot in that sense, but maybe you guys can give me ideas on how to kill her off. I don't know.
Oh, she could give you several.
I bet.
All right. Well, it definitely, again, we appreciate you being our guest, and
Yes, thank you so much.
we look forward to seeing you and the work that you do in the future.
Thank you, Kat. I really appreciate it. Thank you for having me on the show, and it was very nice to meet you and Willie.
It was nice to meet you. Thank you.